So, this is either going to work or it's going to be terrible, but either way, I thought I'd do a quick update. So, hopefully, the new screen's working, and Streamlabs is working. Not using this camera. Actually, we have to thank Armored Carriers because he very kindly pointed me in an app which allows me to use my phone as the camera. So I'm watching myself on my phone. Hi, Paul. Hi, American Orange. Hi, Janice. Hello, hello. Right then, so if you can all hear me, you can all see me, this is all working, that is good. So, this afternoon, I'm hoping to get up the Anglo-Japanese relations, 1902 to 1942, at least the first one. I'm not sure about the second one. Massive echoes. Ooh. I think I have two mics going. Let me see if I do have two mics going. Let me cut down that. And cut down that. Is that better? It echoes. We're hoping this is going to work. We have got an audio input capture working, but let's see. Open the source. And use that one. And done. Is that better? Is there less of an echo now? Very quiet. Is that better? Echo's gone. That's good. So it's louder, but the echo has gone. Right then. So, are we back up to normal? Good. Okay. So, hopefully this will all work. Instantaneous hacking. Oh, let's see. Mic audio input capture. How's that? Hopefully better? I don't know. So I was thinking this was working quite well. It had actually been working well at it. It's good now. It's good. We're going to hope it stays that way. Alright. So plan this afternoon. Still echo and very quiet. Is this very quiet for me? Or is this very quiet and buzzy now? Ooh. Right then. Okay, can you still hear me? All hear me? All okay? Good? It's seriously, I will show this to you. The new system has way too many dials for me to play with. Way too many dials for me to play with. I'm just a historian who likes to study engineering. Give me all these dials and it's going to be fun. So, the plan is to do the Anglo-Japanese relations, which are going to be a recorded video because it is really, really complicated in terms of getting it right. So correcting. Also, camera stutters. No sound now. Go bad again. Hey, so wonder why there's a delay going on. Well. We'll cross fingers. Is that better? Crossing fingers. Yes, that is correct, American Orange. Apparently there is a delay on the chat. I was good at 11:47. So I'm going to take it as I was good about 2 minutes ago. Am I good now? Yes, good now. All right, so There's actually not just a delay on the chat, on the voice, there's also a delay on the video as well, which is slightly weird because I'm seeing myself in the past happening here. I will sort this all out because obviously there is a delay functioning. We'll get to that one. So, not using this because it's not working. And we're going to have the Anglo-Japanese relations start to come out today. But the thing I'm going to have to apologise for is, honestly, the section 4 of the Amphibious Warfare and therefore the part 3 are going to be delayed because seems to be no, as I said yesterday, there is no spine guide really for me to look into these section 4s. There are books about the fighter direction ships, there are books about the headquarters ships, there are books about all these different things, but none of them being put together, and you therefore to try and work it out and put it into what I would consider a sort of order which can be followed and which can understand how they work is taking a lot more time, because honestly I'm surprised no one's done this. So that's what basically you're doing. So I'm doing all that and I'm drinking a lot of iron brew. Anyway, I also thought I'd quickly add, because I am doing these as recordings rather than live, does anyone have any questions about the Amphibious Warfare? Because I've been there's been very few comments, so I've been sort of thinking that I'm missing out on some of the questions, and I do enjoy the questions from you all, so that's what I thought I'd quickly do this session as a quick of, if you have any questions about the Amphibious Warfare so far, if anyone would like to ask them, happy to answer them. And I'm going to move this so I can see it and look at the screen, because otherwise it's weird and I keep looking both two ways. And any questions coming through? Have you been enjoying the videos? I haven't asked this, but are the pictures up? Are the slides up there for long enough? Okay, Jonas. Thank you. Well, the big question I have for everyone is, are the slides up there long enough? Because before I program the Anglo-Japan one and these ones, do you want me to... They're currently on there for 5 seconds. Would you like them longer, or would you like them shorter? What is it? Do you sort of like them? Okay, just first of all, what were the unit costs of landing boats? Actually, they're surprisingly cheap. In fact, some of the landing craft would, when we look at the whole contract and how many are produced, especially the LCAs and those small ones, you're talking $500 to $600 per boat at that time. So these days we're talking several $1,000s. But they're very, very simple, very, very cheap. Mostly made of wood, especially the Higgins boats. Stephen Nash, 10 secs, please. Okay, they will be made longer. Okay, the slides will be up longer. Thank you. As I said, I've been doing all this and I realised I haven't asked you, and you're all a very big part of this. You've made it as successful as it is, so I wanted to check what you like. And besides, that's part of the reason why I really like doing the lives, because I get instant feedback when I muck up. Okay, so slides will be a little longer. The landing craft for part 1 weren't single use. They were used again and again and again. So they are cheap, not really cheap and disposable, but they are expected to be damaged. They're expected to be ripped up, but they're not cheap and disposable, especially the LCMs. So once you're getting into the landing craft which are carrying tanks, they are definitely not disposable. The LCAs are, to an extent, they are riskable. No one's going to worry if you come back without them. But you'd prefer you to come back without them because they need so many of them. So they're building up lots and lots of them. So therefore they're having to build a huge amount of them, but they're not disposable. 'Tis Francis' fault. What? A Thompson machine gun was $250. Yes, but a Thompson machine gun was metal and very difficult to make. A boat itself, once you're making them, and remember there are certain things that are paid for separately, so the engines wouldn't be included in that cost, but that would be the cost of the boat. The engines, again, seem to be different costs and coming through, but basically the boat, if you're talking about Higgins, is made of plywood and pretty much, in theory, proper marine wood for its base, but some of them were made of lumber. They were literally just thrown together pieces of wood, which were not that brilliant. Jeff Beeler, what motivated the Royal Marines to start raising standing units? Henderson again? That's because in World War II, World War I, the Royal Navy Division was mostly sailors. In fact, the Royal Navy Division in World War I was mostly reservist sailors. From quite a large number of them came from the London unit, HMS President, but other R and VR units around the country as well. To an extent, it's the commando operations. You started the Royal Marines come to standing units because they're already part of the Royal Navy. They're already used for amphibious operations and raiding. When the Army starts doing commando operations, the Navy goes, well, hang on, we've got these troops who are actually trained for it, who are specialists already in this, so we'll train them up because they're used to naval things, and this way there'll be some naval commandos, and that's how the Royal Marines become standing units. So it's basically they're drawn together for commando operations, and from there they become the commando brigade, and that's what's being kept. So it's World War II, which has, but Henderson, I would love to say he was involved with this, but actually it's less him, it's more the second Sea Lord, who at the moment I've forgotten the name of the time, but the second Sea Lord at the time was the one who drew up the plans for drawing Royal Marines together. Henderson was probably involved in that because Henderson was definitely pushing landing craft, and he was pushing landing ships like what we would see with the landing ship infantry large, the LSILs, their big part, and the landing ship shoots, because of course they're looking at whalers while he's in charge. But you know, that's what they're sort of looking at when he's involved. Force A1, wasn't there a fairly high wasted rate for a small landing craft? It was abominably high, but they were not considered disposable. So there is a high wastage rate, but because they're cheap and cheerful. Also because they're so, especially, it's going to sound strange, there is a higher, when you go looking across the Allies, there is a very high wastage rate. But you look at the forces, you find the British are far more likely to be reusing, repairing, reusing them than the Americans, who tend to adopt the same policy with landing craft as they do with their aircraft at the time, which is, if it's damaged over the side, get a new one. It works for the Americans. Jonas King Sparta, good luck. Have a nice tea. Have you looked, Fool was here, have you looked into World War I Russian Black Sea Fleet amphibious operations? Lots of purpose designed landing craft, and I'm curious on how they are influenced by the Gallipoli experience. The Russians are very interested in World War I amphibious operations. The Russians have a lot of time for them because mainly they're looking at the Black Sea, and for them the Black Sea is sort of the way to go round the fortifications. So whereas the Germans charge through Belgium, the Russians go round the coast. And unfortunately, though, there isn't really much cross-pollination with Gallipoli. There is probably, the Russians are looking at Gallipoli and thinking, we could learn from the X-Lighters a bit, but because it's the Russians, it's kind of like with the Japanese prior to World War II and their amphibious shipping. The Royal Navy, the US Navy, no one else is really looking at them in those areas because they don't expect them to be good in that area, so they're presuming. It's ego. American Orange. I know this is a bit out of the time frame scope, but when did the Royal Navy first really consider the use of helicopters for amphibious warfare, as seen in Suez? Okay. From the moment the helicopter comes in and starts being considered a practical tool in the late 1940s, the Royal Navy and Royal Marines start thinking about using it for vertical lift. Because remember again, the Royal Navy has a lot of aircraft carriers left over from World War II, specifically HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, and they have a chance for using these, and they can use them. And it makes sense, especially once you start having experience in Burma and other things, that the British forces are looking at helicopters as this tool to maximise presence. If you have fewer numbers, you want to maximise the presence and mobility of those numbers. And the helicopter is a great tool for that. Although it's limited at the beginning, it becomes very good. Paul from Robinson, there was no way Thompson was $250. I know about these things because I am from Chicago. No, I think Thompsons were usually pretty cheaper than $250, but you know, it wouldn't surprise me if some very specialist ones weren't, because there were some. I think some specialist Thompsons tried to be made for commando operations. It is fanciful. Some of them seem really vulnerable to fire. It seems if they didn't take out coastal fence or miss something, it could result in real trouble. Yes. And that was actually the big trouble at Omaha Beach. It wasn't necessarily the beach and these things. Quite a lot of the people had trouble because the artillery wasn't quickly subdued and there were all sorts of... Basically, too many of the machine gun posts on the local light, small artillery and small mortars were not quickly enough subdued at Omaha due to the geography of Omaha, i.e. they were better hidden than on every other beach. And at the other beaches, they managed to overrun them to an extent quicker, or they managed to direct fire them. Or in one case, the landing craft rocket launching vessel managed to get so close it was firing its rockets at point blank range. These things have impacts at other beaches. Omaha is one of those ones which I would love to do more about, and I probably will do more about at some point in the future when I'll go through each of the individual beaches and look at their individual stories. I'll probably do that at some point in June, because it matters. But also because things go wrong which shouldn't have go wrong, but do go wrong. They always go wrong. It's war. Jeff Beeler, crewing them, what were the challenges? Actually, not really a lot of challenge. You have a large number of volunteers signing up, and you have an opportunity, especially for people who don't like being part of big crews where they're anonymous, and or even destroyer crews are quite big in comparison to the landing craft crews. So the landing craft crews are very small, just a couple of people. It's for a certain type of personality who's had to be recruited because of national service in wartime. They are a perfect fit, because instead of you having a officer and crew dynamic, you have pretty much there are 6 or 7 of us. Once you get on the bigger landing craft, there's more of a problem. It's more of a crew. But even then, when you're talking about a crew which is 30 people, that's a very different experience than when you're talking about a crew which is a couple of hundred. So there wasn't really much trouble finding the crew as you would necessarily think, because again, part of the national service issues. Tis fanciful. Paul, well, the Sten was around 4 to 8. It was the biggest issue with Thompson. It was very pricey. Yes, it was. Fu was here. Okay, yes, I know the Russian designs were formerly based on the Volga lighters with Bollender engines. Yes, they were. And the Volga lighters, of course, were actually, in my experience, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's something which was told to me by my dad a long time ago. The Volga lighters and the Thames barges actually have a similar route history, in that some of the people who designed them had worked on Thames barges, and some people who worked on Thames barges had worked on Volga lighters. Because it's going to sound strange, river barges and these systems, they have certain needs and certain materials they have to carry, and that starts to govern their sizes, and they tend to cross-pollinate the ideas quite a bit. Force A1. Thompsons were fairly expensive, which is why M3 grease gunner Stens were produced instead. Yes, and the Sten is as easy to use as anything. There is a video somewhere from me from my days when I was doing my PhD at King's College firing a Sten gun. I think it was a sort of a recreation Sten gun. I don't think it was a World War II original one. But we were taken to a firing range, they were given a day out, taking some students there and doing all sorts of things, and one of the things I got to fire was a Sten gun, and it was fun. I also got to fire a Lee Enfield, which has a kickback like you wouldn't believe. Hi Perry. This Francis rule. How at risk were they at being flooded too? A lot of tanks and no men, even a moderate swell like that seems quite dangerous. Yes, basically the weather is the biggest problem. These craft are not designed for rough weather. In fact, one of the interesting things you find, especially about the ones being used for commando operations, is that the commandos start altering them, start mucking around with them, start raising their freeboard, because the commandos are expected to go in far more extreme weather scenarios than D-Day was aimed for. D-Day was aimed to be in pretty much this band of weather scenario. Commando operations could take place in this band of operation scenarios. The limit for landing craft was pretty much this area. So, it's fun times if you're a commando in an assault craft. Force A1. Were there any post-war attempts by the Royal Navy to build either purpose-built or easily convertible ships into LSILs, like the America SCB-15 attack transport and SCB? Not really. The Royal Navy really didn't need to use them. The interesting scenario is that they did actually look at converting Canberra and Queen Elizabeth in the Falklands War. And they decided not to. They just left their boats on them. Mainly because they found they couldn't actually get enough landing craft quickly, and the landing craft we had available couldn't go on their size davits. It's terrible. But no, if they'd had enough rigid raiders and those sort of things around, you might have seen the Canberra definitely lose its lifeboats for them. But they didn't in the end. In the end, they did some conversions. But no, it worked quite well. I have to say, it's one of the fun things doing all this at the moment, because I can get out books that I haven't been really using much because of because I'm working on the destroyers ones, and I've been able to use them for this work. And one of the things, if you can get hold of a copy of this book, which is Technical Change of British Naval Policy 1860 to 1939, edited by Brian Ramft. It has an excellent chapter in it called Naval Intelligence and Decision Making in an Era of Technical Change, Chapter 7. And what is so good about it is it will give you a very good idea of the issues of naval intelligence in the interwar period. How in the pre-connected world we have now, it was very, very difficult for information to move around. And intelligence was as much about information security, as it ever has been and ever will be, as it was about gathering the information in the first place. And sometimes they weren't able to gather the information because they couldn't maintain the information security. And that affected how they're approaching the interwar period. And what I found interesting is, when I was looking through this book, one of the things that came up was, of course, the amphibious warfare capability of the Japanese. It's the joy of these things. Anyway, thank you very much, and I will now go and get on to recording and putting up the Anglo-Japanese relations 1902 to 1942 for my sins. No, it's actually quite interesting, because the first few slides are going to look at the Russo-Japanese War and the Battle of Tsushima. Then it's going to go on to the Siege of Tsingtao. In fact, I have all sorts of things up here. It's going to cover the period pre-Washington Treaty, and then it's going to look at some of the stuff that goes on in Manchuria and all the other things. It's currently 15 slides long, so it's just about the level at which it would be an hour and a half to 2 hours if I was presenting it live. So I have as I said, it is going to be recorded, but I have a feeling it's going to be 2 or 3 recordings. And what would consider, 'tis Francis' fault, what were considered the major flaws, if any, of the landing craft? That they were so uncomfortable. Literally, and also that they weren't that good at seakeeping. And if you consider the amount of money that's spent to this day now making landing craft better at keeping it in rougher sea states, This is a big thing, and it's one of the interesting things that I find with the current US Marine Corps APC program is it's quite so capable in different sea states. That's really going to be quite interesting. Night Heron Production. Forgive me, not particularly relevant. HMS Glenroy. Do you know where to find plans for her? I'd like to scratch build her. The only place I have seen a copy of plans for HMS Glenroy is in this book. This book here. Okay, that's the British warship design. However, I haven't gone and buried myself in Woolwich Arsenal, which is where the National Maritime Museum stores all the ship plans. So you might want to check with them as well. They are a lovely place. They cannot send you copies of anything, but you can go there. It's the Docklands Light Railway, but it is worth a visit sometimes. If that's not able to do it, then the conversions were done, if I remember correctly. If I remember correctly, the conversions, one of them at least, I'm not sure which one it was converted in Newcastle, which is the Tyne and Weir Archives, which may well have a copy as well. But I can't remember whether it was Glenroy or one of her sisters. But good luck with that. And if you do, Night Heron Production, if you do get it done, please send me a photo or tweet one at me at AC_Naval History. I'd love to see it because they're really cool ships and they're really important to World War II. Ron Shield, book recommendations during your presentations are much appreciated. Well, I have a lot of them, and I do enjoy reading them. There are some good ones around here. There are also some bad ones out there. I get sent books to review as a historian anyway, and I both love it and find it annoying sometimes because sometimes I get books, and the one I was sent to review recently, and I'm not going to talk about it, name it, because review hasn't come out yet. But I was really annoyed by it because it was a really good book, but the pictures and the cover of it and everything were absolutely terrible for it. The publishers had really gone for the cheapest they could get, and it let down the writing. And I actually write this, the writing's better, so I like doing book reviews, but and I will always happily show my books to you because they're good ones. But yeah, there are issues. It's like I would never tell anyone to buy this. Don't. Because despite the name it has on the front cover, if you're looking for something generic, it will have most of the stuff in there. But the moment you're looking at anything like a specialist ships, it doesn't have it in there. If you're looking for things like... It's supposed to cover the whole war, and it does things like list the tribal class destroyers as only having 4 members. And in the nicest way, they have 16 at the beginning of the war. They lose 12 during the war. You don't list them as only having 4. Aha. Right then. So, engaging strategy. Why post-war did a lot of these landing ships fall by the wayside in favour of a more or less one-track approach around the LPD and LST? Only recently we're seeing the USMC playing around again. Literally because once you get into the post-World War II scenario, you're dealing with what are the most capable of these heavy lifters, what have the most potential for providing facility. And the LSD is the best, because you can do a distributed landing from there, especially pre-helicopter. If you consider Operation Claymore and all that, that was really critical, that they could do a distributed landing with big landing craft. And so you don't need a really massive landing craft if you've got larger landing craft and they're coming from a position which already has a few thousand troops on it. But also, if you're not going to have the massed landings, if you're talking about brigade, maybe divisional size landings being the limit of what you're going to do, you don't need the range of equipment. You can afford to condense it down. So that's why they don't sort of survive. But saying that, I'd honestly say, depending on what navies are looking at, I do wish there was slightly more variety still existing today, because there are certain scenarios I'm looking at where it'd be really useful to have those capabilities worked into them, which they could be. It's like the landing ship chute. Having those facilities aboard a River class OPV or a Type 31 class frigate would be a critical enabler of them being very useful to other operations, especially in their presence mission and their patrol missions. So, maybe more it gets spread around, maybe, but pretty much it's because of condensed numbers, and you go with what's the most capable, or rather, what unit encapsulates the broadest range of capabilities, and that's why you focus only on the LSD and the LST to an extent. Night Heron Production. Okay, thank you. You will have to buy. Sorry, building a scratch-built fleet at the moment. Actually, building a flat-built fleet sounds pretty cool. I would, if I had more time, I probably would. That's one of my things to do when I'm retiring, I think. 'Tis Francis' fault. I really do enjoy being able to ask questions on the fly. Appreciate the time spent. Looking forward to the Anglo-Japanese video. Yes, well, we'll get it recorded soon, or at least one of them will get up today. I think it's going to be 2 or 3 videos, so at least part one of it will get up today. Jay Richardson, what's this one about? Destroyers? It's about landing craft. We'll discuss. The landing craft videos have been going up. I realised that you don't have your normal ability to ask me questions, so I wanted to do a sort of question session as I was checking out the system for Tuesday, when I will hopefully be doing this, but with the regular presentation and using all the new equipment. So it's basically a case of you put up with the new equipment and we answer questions and how everything works. Seakeeping in a sense of lessening crew fatigue also almost seems to be an entirely post-war invention. D.K. Brown often remarked on the lack of attention paid to this. That was from Fu was here. Yes, but I would say also that was actually quite a big factor for Henderson in his approach to destroyer designs. He knew that the bigger destroyers, and especially the tribals, were actually going to be better for seakeeping, better for stabilization of guns, but also better for crew. So you have the bigger destroyer has more space and all these things. It makes it far better for crew retention. And that's one of the reasons they're so good at building out elite. Because there is very little turnover in the tribal class crews. Once you're in there, quite a lot of people try and stay in there. Jeff Beeler, how are landing craft organised? Squadrons? What level of COs? Okay, so if you're talking about a little baby landing craft, they're called usually landing craft flotillas. And they're organised in different numbers and sets. But as we were talking about at the beginning, you could have 3 LCMs with 6 crew and a single officer. That's all they needed. LCAs were about the same thing. You could have more, but that's what they could operate on. Or you could grow up to a whole landing craft which could be have a crew of about 30. Usually they were commanded by lieutenants or lieutenant commanders. So usually lieutenants and lieutenant commanders, that sort of rank, would be involved. But there were more senior officers, and one of them, I think, I haven't checked this out yet, so it could be wrong. But there is a story that the Beachmaster at one of the British Beachmaster at Gold, so I presume at the other beach as well, had a counterpart who was captain of the landing craft. And who was in charge of them, and who was actually had been involved in organising everything, and then when it came to D-Day itself, said, "Well, I can't do anything sitting back here." So went and led. There was a 4-ring captain out piloting one of the landing craft, and it was apparently one of the smaller ones because he could dash around and deal with things whilst also getting troops in and out. But I haven't. That story has been told to me, and I haven't managed to check it out since I've been doing this work on Amphibious ships. I've been getting some lovely emails and some lovely direct messages on Twitter and some lovely sort of messages through various things on Academia EDU. And so this has been a story which has been told to me, and I've gone back and I'm going to look for more information to try and verify it, because it's a really cool thing if it is true. Jeff Beeler, Conway's is better than Jane's. You normally wouldn't get me to say this because they're regular books, no, but in their big books, yes. 'Tis Francis' fault. Jeff, I think he said they were grouped in threes, but maybe wrong. Some were grouped in threes, and then they were grouped up higher than that, so there'd be sort of 3, and then there'd be 4 groups of 3 in a flotilla, and there'd be sort of 12 and these sort of things. But some were grouped in twos, and basically it depends on what they're moving. It's almost as if the landing craft are organised right then. We need to be able to move a company with a set of landing craft. This is how many landing craft we need. Boom, boom, boom. We'll work out those numbers. Okay. Jay Richardson, I heard LSD is the best. LSD, it gives you the broadest range of capabilities. So the LSD encapsulates the broadest range of capabilities. So if you want to retain as much capability as possible in the amphibious force, you go for the vessel which can give you the broadest range of them. Good afternoon, Blue Shirt Buddha. Kilo 19, good afternoon. 1965 Jack, discovered your channel this week. Very interesting and easy to follow. Thank you. Well, thank you for saying that. Blue Ship Buddha, at Dr. Clark, in your opinion, which was more historically important, ship in World War II, the LSD or the LST? In World War II, it's the LST. That's sheer numbers alone. That's massively more important. Long term, it becomes the LSD, but in World War II, LST is the most important, probably the most important amphibious craft. It's why there's an entire, as I said, entire part is devoted to them, because despite them being Mark 1s, Mark 2, Mark 3s, they're important. But conversely, I would say historically long term, it's the British purpose-built LST Mark 1s which are most important for the future of amphibious warfare. But for World War II itself, it's the LST2s. It's got to be. They just outnumber everything else. They are World War II's amphibious forces. Without them, you don't have an amphibious warfare. Jay Richardson, okay, cool, thanks. Title said update and showed a picture of some Sea and Tribal class destroyers. Yes, I know. It's a general update, and it's got the destroyer pictures going up. Basically, what I'm trialing out is it's cycling through all the pictures I've used so far in my presentations. And I thought that'd be quite a nice screen to put up and have flashing through when I'm talking to you generally, instead of you just having to stare at my face. I thought you might enjoy that. Hoping you do. Okay. Phil was here. Much looking forward to the IJN landing craft episode. Yeah, that's going to be coming at some point, actually, I think. An American landing craft as well. And curious enough, probably Russian landing craft. But it's getting around to them and finding the sources for them. I think landing craft is one of those series which is going to grow and continue, and amphibious warfare, because some of the stuff in it, the more I've dug into it, it's becoming more and more. The reason I started doing destroyers in the interwar period, and the reason I got attracted to them and found them such an interesting part of history to go to, is because there was so little well written about them. There were a few good books, but they were like sort of diamonds in the middle of nowhere. And I'm finding the same with amphibious warfare in World War II, in that there is no good text which tries to bring it all together and provide a good. Well, what I use this for, I use this as a spine text. So there's no good spine text which people can use as a starting point and then branch out from into their own areas of interest. Fu was here. Have you made any contributions to Conway Warship Annual? I always check it for book reviews when I'm shopping. No, I've never been asked by them. I do most of my book reviews for the Northern Mariner, which is a free-to-read Canadian-based history journal. They're very nice, very friendly, very good. They're actually going to be publishing some journal articles of mine at some point. They've got them with them. They've got through the process. They're just waiting for them to come to the point where they get published. They're lovely people, though. And it is kind of funny that I find that the Canadian journals are very happy to publish me talking about tribal class destroyers, actually. Surprise, surprise. And there was one British journal which was keen to publish me, but they had issues with editing, so they didn't manage to do it. And the other British journals were all going, well, why are you doing destroyers? Destroyers don't matter. Destroyers aren't interesting. And I went, well, they are interesting. I like them. Jay Illness, have you got a copy of Conrad Waters' book on British town-class cruisers? Has a brilliant picture of HMS Edinburgh as a front piece. Yes, I do have a copy of his book. I also have a copy of Neil McCart's the other one. Okay, that's also a lovely book. Both, if you read them both together, that will give you an excellent history of the Town Class cruisers. Oh, good lord. Will C99. Alec Guinness also commanded, I think, an LCT at Subby. Yes, he did. Sub-lieutenants were also used quite a lot as well. They weren't supposed to be, but they were used quite a lot. Midshipmen, all sorts of ranks ended up command of landing craft. A fair number of them were run by leading seamen. Killix in Royal Navy parlance. This is Francis' fault. I think there had been a tragic under-mentioning of Saving Private Ryan depiction of the landing boats. No. Just no. I do actually, that movie is good in many, many ways, and Tom Hanks is to be lauded because his programs often spend a large amount of money on historians and working with them. I know I've been involved peripherally with some of his projects. Haven't actually been in the point where I've been paid, but I've been called up by people who are working on them. They've gone, is it this? And I've gone, yes, that's correct. I know his Battle of the Atlantic one, I think it's going to be pretty good. I'm not sure if that's coming out as a movie or a series. I would so love it to have been a series if it is a movie because there's so rich material which could be good put there. But I think it's a movie, and I think he's starring as the captain, and that's going to be a movie I'm definitely going to want to watch. Engaging strategy. Where did the LVTs fit in amongst the landing craft? I'm not sure if they were used on any scale D-Day, but got used later for the Rhine crossings and certainly by the US in the Pacific. Okay. The trouble is, they are a very useful asset. And I wish LVTs had been more part of the European theatre, and the British especially had got into them, because I think the Royal Marines could benefit from that massively in their heritage. But they don't get much use in D-Day because, again, there are a huge number of landing craft over here, and they're going to be able to take tanks with them. Whereas the Americans are dealing with coral reefs and all sorts of things to try and get at islands in the Pacific. So an LVT over there is absolutely critical in the Pacific. In the European theatre, it's a nice to have. So that's the difference. Okay, that's why the LVTs are mostly going to the Pacific. Phil was here. I thought so, but I thought I'd clarify the LSD is the best thing, just in case it wasn't. Ian Greener, hello. Perry Robin, I discovered your channel thanks to Drakenfanel. I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful to Drakenfanel. He's a very cool guy, and he's been very helpful. Ian Greenley, that destroyer in the background may have broken up half a mile from my house. A few of that class were. Yeah, that's quite possible. That's quite possible. Phil was here. Yes, the sources for World War I Russian landing craft possibly don't exist yet, or at all much said. No, they don't. So that's going to be fun. That is going to be fun to track them down. Jeff Beaker, I'm sorry we never got to see Henderson's carrier group in action together. Courageous and glorious, dying alone, except for DDs. Yeah, but I think you do sort of see his carrier groups in action, because when you look at the British Pacific Fleet and the task forces it's mounting and the ideas they're using for their organisation, yes, we all say that there is a feedback of information going on between them and the Americans, but they're also using quite a lot of their exercise material, quite a lot of the doctrine they developed in the interwar period, which was put forward. And they are, of course, the carriers. Many of them are the carriers. All of them are carriers based on designs which either Henderson had organised or Henderson originated. So it's his task group. It's not being used perhaps as quite as he would have used it, but it is his carrier task groups. 'Tis Francis' fault. Getting details of the Japanese wartime anything is hard enough. I imagine the landing boats are even more obscure. You have... Seriously, I am... It's like they're hammers, and everyone's a builder. The hammer is so ubiquitous, no one thinks about it. But it's actually quite important to the job. The landing craft are the hammers of amphibious operations, but they're forgotten. Banholm, if the restrictions had not been in place, do you think the Town class would have been closer to the Sveldov class, or do you think the RN would have ended up on the same size? I think the town class could have been a bit bigger. I think they could have been a bit bigger. I don't know if they've been quite as big as the Sveldovs, but I think they might have been a little bit bigger. And probably a little bit more armor. It's sort of they would have probably had more powerful engines, more fuel, and more armor fitted, because those are the only things they really needed to do to be better. Draken Fennell, don't forget the wooden versions of landing craft in Robin Hood. I will never forget the wooden versions of landing craft in Robin Hood. Those are so wrong in so many ways. Ian Greenlee, favourite naval movie? Probably the Battle of the River Plate. I'm sorry, I'm a traditionalist. I love that movie. I love the fact that they got everything as close to correct as they could. That there are parts of points where there are people who were actually really involved in events are actually in the movie. And they tried to use things as close to it as they could. And it's as accurate as you can make a movie at that time. Jermark, weren't LVTs used in some battles in Netherlands later? Welcome. Yes, there are not no LVTs in the European theatre, but they're very few in number and far less ubiquitous than they were in the Pacific, where pretty much they are the Sherman of the Pacific. That's the thing. The Pacific War, the equivalent in terms of vital utility of the Sherman, the Jeep, is the LVT, because that's critical to how you fight the Pacific War. I'm seeing some great movie selections coming up here. Perry Roden, Das Boot. I don't think Drax waded in yet, but yeah, lots of good movies coming up. Thank you, Will. Your same correct selection as me, The Battle of the River Plate. Jay Richardson, speaking of good books, are there any good books on HMS Vanguard aside from Bert's Last Battleship? Not really. I'm trying to think. Unfortunately, the appropriately named book behind me is on reconnaissance and intelligence. So, behind D-Day. So I've got a book called Vanguard, but it's not about the battleship at all. It is helpful though. And for those who aren't sure, this is Carlton D. Wyatt's book. So there you go. That's his book, and that's what he's got in it. Happy Odyssey. That is Adrian the Carlton de Wyatt, and it's a very cool book to read. Ashkenvan, hello from the UK. Hello to Vancouver. Right then. There are some very good movies coming up here. Ooh. Sink the Bismarck is great. It is it is a good book and a good movie, and it's based on the book produced by Ludovic Kennedy, The Pursuit of the Bismarck. Basically, his book is what heavily informs that movie and its entire formations, and it's pretty cool when you look at some of the people, the real pictures of the people there. Also, when you look through some of these things, you realise that eye patches really were very, very common. Really, really were very common. Sorry, carrying it up. There you go. Really common to have an eye patch, apparently. Oh. Wasn't Kennedy on Duke of York? No. Kennedy was aboard HMS Tartar, a Tribal class destroyer. And he really did want to sink the Bismarck because his dad was sunk in command of HMS Rawalpindi. Were any tribals part of Operation Dynamo? Okay. So, when you have the Battle of... Let me just put something up there. There is something called the Battle of... Google. The Battle of Ushant. And that takes place during D-Day. And basically it's... I will put up for you all a link to it. Yep, there you go. I've found a link. So, it's not now letting me sign into the chat. That's interesting, but not impossible to deal with. Sorry about this. I'm live now. So, now I've just posted a link to a Global Maritime History paper which covers has a bit about the Battle of Ushant in it, which I think you all might enjoy. Basically, it covers what the tribes were doing during Operation Dynamo and Overlord, and what they were basically hanging around doing. In terms of Operation Dynamo, when it's Dunkirk, the tribals are up in Norway and securing those sort of things, but now, they actually do get involved still, because when it comes to the recovery, second recovery of the British which I think they actually are part of the force to withdraw them there, and I've got that written in my book. But then, when it comes to Operation Overlord, instead of them being at the front, as they have been for every other previous amphibious operation, they are put on flank guard duty, and their job is to stop the E-boats getting them close. And stop the Germans being able to do a death ride like the British might have done. The Germans must have Britain on anything that's going on there. Which I think they actually are part of the force to withdraw that there. And I've got that written in my book. During Operation Dynamo, when it comes to Operation Overlord, let me just find where I was. The front, as they have been. Night Harriers reduction. I found an article on the colour footage of HMS Hood shot in 3940 will still be part of intended film so-called The War from the Hood with soundtrack support. And screens of all the hood in the late 1940s indicate footage intended. Wow. That's a lot of very cool information, which I hope you're getting to read. Brock Bain, I patches just mean your badass quoting is higher than normal. Yes, definitely. I found an article on the colour footage of HMS Hood shot in 3940 will still be part of intended film so-called The War from the Hood. Night Harrier Productions, I know some of the footage exists, but most appears to have been lost, though I have found black and white shots of Hood and Repulse and Arc Roll and Tribals from this project, shot presumably in 1939. More than likely, that's when they were all combined together up in... pretty much in 1939 they started being gathered together up in the Scarpa Flood. Jerison, getting voice feedback. Audio. Voices, the voices. I need to mute my other channel. Night Harrier Productions. I know some of the footage exists, but most appears to have been lost. So I have... Okay. Is that better? Is that better? Are the trippy voices over? Hoping the trippy voices are over. I will get this working properly. Right. So I'm now going to go quickly and get on with the Anglo-Japanese relations, at least part 1. But I just want to check any questions before I go. Ask a man, how accurate is HMS Ulysses by Alistair MacLean? It's okay. It's good-ish. Sorry, didn't hear any answer. Night Hair in production. Ooh. What was the question? Jewel Fuba, is someone humming the theme from Doctor Who, Porter from Chicago? I didn't think I was. I will remember this in future. These things don't like to work together. In the late 18th century, FH drew up dedicated landing craft for the Swedish archipelago fleet for cavalry, front ramps and all. Our propulsion, like the rest of the archipelago fleet. Yes, they did. Remember, landing craft are usually developed not because you're worried about putting infantry ashore, but because you worry about putting other things ashore. You know, the really big point that I make about landing craft development into war period, the reason that the British are doing it is because of tanks, but also the reason they're not making so many is because tanks keep growing in size. And the Royal Navy are going to have to make a big investment in landing craft for them to be viable. So you're either going to limit the size of the Army's tanks, or you're going to have landing craft you can't use. So that's why it's only a few ships made and it's only a few turned out. It's enough to sort of build an industry and work out how to do things and make sure you have that technology understanding. Not enough to really tie you to anything. Jeff Beeler, speaking of movies, I found one from Japan called Battle in the Sea of Japan on the Russo-Japanese War. Interesting. Yes, there is a huge section on Tsushima coming up today in the Anglo-Japanese relations because it's very, very important, and I'll get to say the word dreadnought a lot afterwards and various factors and pack them quite a bit. So it's going to be fun. Let's put it this way. Today, so far, I've already gone through a lot of this stuff, so, you know, more will be going. Ian Greenley, does the River Clyde experience play a role in the later landing craft developmental thinking? Yes, it does. Banham, at some point will you get into more modern stuff like Suez Crisis, Korea and such? Yes, I will do. Actually, I think this month, if I remember correctly, May, I've got one coming up on the Falklands War, which I did run with my girlfriend, ran a joint conference on the 37th anniversary of it in Manchester University, and were taking part in organising the 40th anniversary conference, which is going to be hosted at King's College London. And we had people like Michael Clapp, the Commodore Amphibious Task Group, there, and Major General Julian Thompson, who was Brigadier 3rd Commander Brigade, both there, and they both gave a talk and all sorts of things. So I will definitely be doing more modern stuff soon. Ian Greenley. Yes, she was. And a huge part of the Japanese fleet is built not very far from where you lived, actually, and quite a large chunk of it. People don't realise quite how much. They focus on the battleships. They don't realise quite a lot of the stuff further down the tree also came from the UK. Jay Richardson, did the Americans really fear the Anglo-Japanese alliance in a hypothetical alternate war, RNIJN versus USN outcome? Yes, they did. Everyone's got to have a worst-case scenario. So, the American Navy's worst-case scenario is fighting the Royal Navy because they're the same size as them. Okay? They don't have a number advantage. The air advantage of this Royal Navy is the Royal Navy is spread out over multiple oceans, and they're spread out, divided between two. But the Royal Navy can concentrate in the Atlantic far quicker and far easier than the US Navy can pull the Pacific Fleet round. So if you've got the Japanese Navy also taking part with the Royal Navy, so the Japanese going all war, doing Pearl Harbor again, whilst the Royal Navy are doing the same on the Atlantic coast, then the Americans are in a very big trouble. It's basically, it's your worst case scenario, because at that point the Americans lose their control of the seas. And yes, they might be able to invade Canada, but so far, every time they've invaded Canada, things haven't worked out well for the Americans. The Canadians are very nice, they just don't like uninvited guests, okay? If you're an uninvited guest and you turn up armed, you don't get a warm reception in Canada, especially if you're flying American flags. So they didn't have, I'm not sure if they could win there, and then there's also problems with Mexico and these things. So in the nicest way, their worst case scenario is an Anglo-Japanese alliance. Bayard Hammer. Any plans on tackling the small supply crafts, i.e. barges, both in the European and Pacific theatres? Seems they also seem to be rarely noticed. Yes, I will be getting round these things. I've got a whole list of things now. I think me and Drakenfell are going to be competing soon for who's got the longer lists. His advantage is he's been going longer and been gathering the lists for longer. My advantage is that, well, it seems to be people are going, right then, we can ask him this. We can ask Alex this. We can ask Alex this as well. So I think we're going to be competing for lists. Or we might just swap lists around, just for the hell of it. See if anyone notices which one of us is actually answering the questions. Night Heron Production. Oh, here's one I'd like to hear your opinion on. World War II for Britain without the Scissor mission, or at least without giving all that information away to the Americans essentially for free. It becomes a lot harder for the Americans to catch up, but it also becomes a lot harder for the British to get the supplies they need. Okay? Yes, we give a lot of information to the Americans, but that comes back in terms of goodwill, in terms of getting us the manufactured items. So, we needed the equipment, we were prepared to give them the intelligence. Plus, giving them the equipment, giving them the information and the scientific sources and all these things made the equipment they were supplying to us better. So, it was a good workout for us in the end. Drakenfell, we can divvy up naval history between us. That sounds good and fun. Right, so I am going to... Good Lord. Just realised how long I've been on here for. Commodore Side, Paul from Chicago, Commodore Side, I read Mr. Midshipman Easy. Does that count? Yes. It does. Right, so, as said, I'm going to go work on the Anglo-Japanese and record that one. As I said, you might only get part 1 today because it's the time it takes to encode as a video. I record it, and then it has to turn it into a video which can be uploaded to YouTube. Then it has to be uploaded to YouTube. Then YouTube has to agree to it. And that process itself, well, last night there was one which I had finished recording at 10 o'clock, and it didn't get loaded up till 1 a.m. And I thought, well, should I make this wait any longer? No, I put it up at 2. I just, set it up to go at 2, because that seemed the sensible thing to do. Right, so... Take care. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for asking questions. And have a nice day. Hope you're having a good Sunday. And everyone remember to keep watching Drakenfell whenever he comes on. He keeps sending people over, very kindly people over to watch me. And I'm very happy. If you aren't already, make sure you see Drakenfell's presentations, because they're always good. I only get to see about 1 in 2 of them because I'm usually busy as well sorting out mine. But no, they're always good. Anyway, take care. Have a nice Sunday. And hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. Same to you, RAF4. Thanks.